Hello and welcome to the Enterprise Fitness Education Series. We've got Bob Gill here. Today we're going to get into the ins and outs of, kind of this prehistoric diet, for lack of a better term, paleo, and talking about some of those issues that arise when you talk about these things. The first one I want to hit is grains. You were talking to me about some of the people you've spoken to. Do you care to elaborate?
Sure. Well, if you ever read on the Paleolithic Diet, you'll hear this too, but I've spoken to they're called forensic anthropologists, and what they do is they go back and they look at, their remains, and they look at causes of death, and they look at all these types of things. And I happened to be in a room with two guys that this was what they did for a living, very, very bright gentlemen, and I was talking to them. The first thing they said is they know that prehistoric man was very lean and very muscularly dense. And so, being the nutritionist and curious, I started asking questions. And they said, yes, we know for a fact that during the Neolithic era, which is where we went from hunter-gatherer to agriculture, that before we made that transition from hunter-gatherer to actually agricultural, that the leading causes of death were, other than accidents, were typically infections. Okay? Bacterial infections, viral infections, that type of thing. Once we transitioned into this agricultural era and we started eating more grains, there was a dramatic rise in heart disease, cancers, diabetes, and everything, and it's escalated ever since then. Okay, so when you look at that, what did the average caveman eat? And grow their food, so they had to pick vegetables and fruits when they were in season. They ate a lot of meat. Typically in the wintertime, they ate a ton of meat because there wasn't a lot, if they lived in a colder climate, there wasn't a lot of vegetation. And they ate nuts, berries, things like that. So when you look at that moving forward, who was the first person to diagnose celiac disease? Socrates.
Right.
Okay? And, Caesar used to make his prisoners eat rye because it would fog their head, make them feel lethargic, make them feel sick all the time so that they were less likely to try to escape.
Right.
Okay? That's historically in the books. So when you look at that, like I went to, you asked me what the ideal diet is. I gave a talk at the University of Massachusetts to a support group for stroke patients and the students that support this group. And so the hand came up and said, so what do you think about food? And obviously the person that asked me was wondering what he should eat now that he's had a stroke, okay? And what's the best way to survive? And of course my comment to him was, well, what if I told you that part of the reason why you're here is because of the food you've been eating your whole life, and that's exacerbated your condition? Of course, you get all this muddle and everything else. And so I went on talking about foods. And the guy raises his hand again. He says, so what you're saying to me is we need to learn how to read labels. And I said, no. So the truth is, if you want to be as healthy as you can possibly be, if it has a label, don't eat it. Okay? I was driving my car one day. It was a pretty long drive, and I was listening to these two people talk from Harvard Medical School. One was a research PhD dietitian, and the other was a research PhD cardiologist. They did a 10-year study. It was kind of a secretive study. They started it 10 years ago. They just came out with all their findings. Their purpose for doing this study was, and it was very eloquently done, because in the 70s, when we went on this big don't eat fat kick, we got to eat carbohydrates kicks, and statins came on the market. In that time frame of almost 30 years, do you know what the reduction in, with all the advancements in modern medicine and everything else, the reduction in first-time heart attack is?
What was that?
Less than 0.1%. So these people started thinking, well, if we made all these changes and we've got this reduction in heart attack by less than 0.1% over a 30-year period, what are we doing wrong? First off, they came out and said there are no studies that show that low fat is better for your heart. Not a study. It was a cardiologist, a predominant cardiologist, who suggested it at that time.
That was Ansel Keys?
Pardon?
Ansel Keys?
Yes.
Yeah.
And all that was because he made the suggestion, that was it. They didn't need to do a study. He said this, that's what we're going by.
There's obviously a lot of politics in that too. Time man of the year and,
So, yeah, and what they concluded was that really, and this was just recently, this was probably a month ago, I heard them, they're coming out with this big report in a study and they're publishing it in a book, that it's the processed carbohydrates.
Yes.
That's the offending problem. Now these are two Harvard Medical School researchers, spent 10 years doing all this study. But the most poignant thing is, and of course they debunked that whole thing with eggs and cholesterol, and proved that to be just another theory. But the one thing that this woman said that I really caught my attention. She said this whole thing about red meat causing coronary heart disease, red meat causing cancers. Again, no studies to show it, all hearsay. Now in our world, a medical doctor will look at us and say that's just hearsay. There's so many things that go on in the standard medical profession that are hearsay, but for some reason it's considered accepted. What she went on to say is, in truth, particularly grass-fed red meat is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. Your best source of B12, your best source of zinc, one of your best sources of B6, one of your best sources of heme iron, period.
But another thing I just wanted to add to that is when a lot of the research comes out about red meat or meat, you know, they bucket things like sausages, cold cuts, processed meats, all into the same package, and they say things like, you know, I think it was a study done in the States, a high protein diet is more likely to cause cancer. And if you looked at the sources that they were having, it was literally, I think, McDonald's beef.
Right. They're very unfair studies. They're almost set up like deliberately to fail because they don't look at the quality of the meat, and they group it, and they're.
It's not even a conversation, the quality.
And it's not really a laboratory study. It's not where they actually, like, when people see this, a study shows, they think, oh, they took red meat, they took people, they put them in a laboratory, and they ran all these tests. That's not done. It's somebody sitting at a desk, looking at the numbers, looking at the topography of everything, and saying, oh, it must be red meat, because look at all these poor people eat McDonald's every day, so it's got to be red meat.
Without realizing it's also the lifestyle, cigarettes, alcohol, and they don't, maybe even recreational drugs.
They don't throw that into the mix
no
at all.
Exercise. You know, there's obviously, you know, staying up late. All of that goes with it. There's a lot of other factors that go with it, and you know, the thing that people want to hold their hat on is the fact that red meat. And I actually had Alan Watson, who's the author of 21 Days to a Healthier Heart, on my podcast show a couple of years ago now, and he actually pointed out that in American studies versus Argentinian studies, Argentinians eat double the amount of red meat in a diet, yet half the rate of cancers. And he correlated that to the CLA content that is in red meat, which is which is cancer protective. And obviously in Argentina, it's much more easily accessible for grass-fed meat. Whereas if you go to the US, you know, it's a lot more common to have factory farmed CAFOs, getting the cheapest of the cheap out to the masses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, any other, I suppose, final thoughts on red meat or a Paleolithic diet?
Just that when you look at foods and you look at the paleo diet, all right, you just we as a species put all this faith in our scientists and these big corporations to do the right thing. If you want to be healthy, you want to eat as natural as possible. So it's very hard for people to understand that all these things we do to alter our food, to genetically modify it, to put in these additives, to put in these food colorings, all these added things to make it taste better. That's not what our body wants. Our body wants the basics, raw, natural foods that we were designed to eat. Okay? All these processed foods, when you look at the history of the human being, only came about in a very short period of time. Yeah, maybe over another 100 years we might adapt to these additives and things we put in the food, but we might lose a lot of people in the interim. Okay, so
we'll certainly lose the quality of life for those.
Exactly, and if you look, there's a big fad now going on. I wouldn't say it's a fad. A lot of people looking at more natural foods and taking better care of themselves, like yourself, myself, and groups of people. But there's still a lot of people who don't, and it's almost like we've got two societies now: the healthy and the unhealthy.
It's almost like the poor and the rich.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I hope that's food for thought. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Make sure you like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and obviously we'd love to see you at the next course with Bob Gull or one of our internships. Thanks for watching.